So my name's Angela. I'm a Work on Climate volunteer. Thank you for joining this session. We also have with us from Work on Climate Priyanka Rande, who will be supporting the event and helping to monitor the chat throughout. We have, before we start, we have a few housekeeping notes. The session's being recorded and will be posted on YouTube after. We have an hour together, and our format for today will begin with a 20-minute presentation led by our guest speaker, Ryan James, founder of Rebez, followed by a 15-minute interactive breakout session where you'll get to discuss some of the concepts shared, and we'll get everyone back for group sharing and Q&A after, before we close. So a little bit about Work on Climate. If you don't know of us or aren't part of the community, we're a community of 29,000 members. We're a nonprofit organization and the world's largest, most active community addressing talent shortages in climate. We're on a mission to transform the talent ecosystem and build the workforce humanity needs to solve climate change equitably and justly. So I'm delighted now to hand over to Gizem, who is part of the Project Tipping Point community, to kick us off.
Thanks, Angela. Thank you. I'm Giz. I work in sustainability in the built environment, and I'm a member of the Project Tipping Point community and a past student. I finished the course in March, and I wanted to bring Ryan here because Project Tipping Point has been a transformational experience for me. The course itself is great, and Ryan will tell you all about it in a minute. But for me, the best bit was the amazing community of people I connected with. And it's not a coincidence that this happened, because Ryan and the other founders generously share their time, and they create a safe and nurturing environment that enables these connections. So with that, I'll be handing over to Ryan James. Ryan, take it away.
Mahalo, Giz, and thank you, Angela and Priyanka, for helping out. And aloha, everyone. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Ryan. Some people call me Ra. I'm currently calling in from the big island of Hawaii. If any of you have been here, you know how beautiful it is. It's one of the models that I work with to understand what it's like to live on an island, because we all live on island Earth. So it's really important to understand how we can live on an island. So it's very synchronistic that I'm calling in here today from this island, because this is one of the places that we can model how to actually be here together on an island called Earth that we all live on together. So this is probably not going to be your typical call. I always give people that heads up. The first question that I like to ask everyone here is, how many people care about the climate, care about Earth? You can raise your hand. You can, I'm assuming it's everyone here. That's why you're here with Work on Climate. Okay, so how many people have ever said thank you to the water? I saw one hand. Few, or I guess a bunch of yellow hands. It's pretty good. More people than normal. Normally when I ask that question, everyone raises their hand for caring about the climate and caring about the Earth. Yet only about one person has ever said thank you to the water, or continues to do that on a day-to-day basis. And I start with this question because a lot of the times we are attempting to care about something or fix something that we don't even have a relationship with. And what they say in Lakota is mini wachoni. They say water is life. Some of you may have heard about this within the Dakota Access Pipeline, Standing Rock, and all of these sort of things. So what that's saying is water is synonymous with life, and that life doesn't exist without water. So if we don't have a relationship with water, we can't have a relationship with life. And a lot of the work on climate that we need to do right now in the world is rooted in relationship. If we don't have a relationship with life, we're not going to really be able to approach the situations in a way where we're coming at them from a place of non-hierarchy or from a place of equilibrium. And on this slide that you can see in front of you, we use a quote that some of you may have heard, and it's basically the core understanding of Project Tipping Point is that the way we're responding to the crisis is a part of the crisis. Albert Einstein also said something like this. He said, you cannot solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created it. Now, what this means is that the more that we attempt to utilize the same levels of thinking, the same methodologies of creation towards attempting to solve a problem that we really fully don't understand, the more that we continue to proliferate more problems rather than solutions. Because if our worldview and our mindset hasn't actually shifted, then we're going to just approach the situation in the same way over and over and over again. Does that make sense to everyone? And the issue with mindset is it's not deep enough. You know, a lot of people talk to me about mindset, and I ask them, well, what is your mind set in? And the mind is set in a worldview. And the worldview that the majority of the work that I've witnessed in the world happening in is something called business as usual, which consists of a mechanistic, meaning earth as machine, something where you can extract one tree and plug another tree in. Reductionistic, meaning compartmentalizing all of the different functions of earth into one thing that you can just, you have to break it to actually understand it, how science likes to cut apart animals, study the liver and the lungs and the nose, and then attempt to understand the animal when now the animal's dead. You know, that would be an example of reductionism and compartmentalization. And we're also relying a lot on financialization, which is one of the reasons and that has created one of the situations that we're in. Because the more that we commodify nature, when nature actually is ourselves, the more that we continue to extract and dilute our potential to live in harmony with the planet. So this quote is the guiding force of what Project Tipping Point is, because we're moving from a dominant worldview into a worldview rooted in kinship. How many people know what kinship means when I say that? Couple. Does one of you want to share what your understanding of kinship is?
I'll try taking a poke at it. I think everybody's idea of kinship probably is a little bit different. My own is one of building relationships with folks and feeling a sense of connection with not just other humans, but also with more than human life forms. You mentioned thanking the earth, thanking the water at the beginning. I feel like there's a sense of kinship with things that are beyond my understanding as a human being and as a be like, you know, how I'm embodying my lifetime in this world. That's my understanding and kind of loose definition of kinship. I welcome and really love hearing other people's definitions and understandings of that term, though, too.
Yeah, thank you. So
I'll take a poke at it as well. To me, kinship is our kinship with the natural world, not just humans and animals, but all of the natural world and elements in it.
thank you. Yeah, so those are both good definitions. Normally what I do, we have to build out a polarity, right? A binary, not in the sense that they're separate, but the sense of positive and negative, how they're both needed for a car battery to start. So kinship is on one side, Dominant worldview is on the other side. Dominant, meaning dominance over. So power over Earth, which is really what we're operating with now as humans, is that we're attempting to utilize Earth for our own benefit continuously, over and over and over again, and that we're the ones in control. I mean, it's in the first line of the Bible, right? Humans given dominance over nature, essentially. The creepy crawlies, it's mentioned in there. It's probably a mistranslation, but regardless, dominant so means dominance over. It also means dominant, meaning the most volume. So as we can see what globalization has done, it's done a lot of really good things, but it's also spread a monoculture of the mind that has ripped apart bioregional understandings and culture. So culture and civilization also sit on opposite sides of the spectrum. And basically my background over the last 13 years, I've been traveling around the world for 13 years to about 60 countries, studying and learning with different indigenous teachers and learning about how to weave in their cultural understandings into our modern day economics. And Chiz, this is where you could shift the slide. So you can go to the biodiversity one, actually, and then I'll go back to Project Tipping Point. So some of you may know this fact that 80% of the world's biodiversity is stewarded by 5% of the world's people, and that's indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that 95% of us, if we haven't lived or understood and embodied these ways of life, they're not concepts, they're ways of life, then we have a lot to learn from this 5% of people. So a kinship worldview is rooted in all of these cultural paradigms, culture meaning something that emerges from the earth in any given place. The language speaks the language of the earth. The people live in that capacity. In the same way that a eucalyptus tree emerges from Australia, the Aboriginal people have emerged from that place, and they're a member of that community. They are kin with that natural community. So why this is important is because as we move towards climate, which is really another word for earth, that obscures the interconnections between all things. Climate is a very abstract term. So as we're looking into biodiversity and we're looking into all the things that make up the ecosystemic nature of Earth, it's important to reconnect with our relationship with Earth. It's important to reconnect with our bioregion of Earth, because the more that we try to go out and save some other part of the world, because we really care about the Amazon, but yet we still haven't awoken to the animacy of life outside of our front door in the UK, we still don't have a relationship with life. We're still trying to fix something that we don't understand. And this is what continues to create this loop, which is called business as usual, where we continue to approach things that create more problems. In the same way that the renewable energy transition isn't necessarily a transition, it's an addition. More renewable energy is being built, but fossil fuels are not slowing down. In that same way, we need to reinvigorate our relationship with life. And this is what Project Tipping Point is about. So Jiz, if you want to go back to the Project Tipping Point slide. So Project Tipping Point came out of this initiative called Rebiz. Rebiz is a business as usual unschool that helps to reconnect business with Earth. Because right now, business is disconnected from Earth. It's disassociated from Earth. It actually destroys life. It doesn't create life. So out of Rebiz, which is this 4-week business as usual unschool, we realized that there's so many positive impact with climate, positive impact with the Earth, but a lot of it's still coming from the same angle that has created a lot of the problems. And I do talks and speeches around the world with climate tech companies, with venture capitalists, with various different conferences, and a lot of them understand that the mindset and the worldview shift is key to the evolution of their work, yet very little and very few of them are actually implementing a different worldview and mindset. They're coming from Silicon Valley and they're building a new technology with climate. And it's coming from the same exact mentality of creating a software, except you're dealing with a living entity of Earth. So you can't apply that same mindset and worldview to that problem. So Project Tipping Point came together. We're now over 300 members from 55 countries around the world who are actively learning how to implement a worldview of kinship and right relationship and reciprocity and regeneration into the climate movements, into all of our organizational work. And the spaces that we create are there for people to sit in the unknown. You don't have to have an answer. Actually, if you have an answer, that's probably part of the problem. We need to have a lot more questions than we need to have answers. So part of Project Tipping Point is also just to aggregate, as Jiz was saying, the community. We need to ally with one another. We need to collaborate instead of compete. As one of my teachers says, it's more about linking rather than scaling. So we have to actually all come together. And what we do in Project Tipping Point is that it's a hotbed. It's a compost heap of people who are coming together. And things are being created out of Project Tipping Point, initiatives that are more aligned than where people want to work with in their life. They're coming in and they're being able to create that with those like-minded and like-hearted people who come into Project Tipping Point. So it's this entire ecosystem in itself, where there's content, where there's community, where there's breakout groups, questions. And from what I've heard, people leave Project Tipping Point with far more questions than when they came in. And for me, if that happens, that means that I did a good job. Because the more that we think that we have the answer right now, utilizing the same mindset and approach, we're very wrong. Because we really don't understand the depth of what we're doing. And I can share this from experience. I thought that I knew. I studied finance. I traveled doing renewable energy and building microgrids in Myanmar and doing work in Cameroon and doing all of these different sustainable climate movement things. But until I actually met the indigenous elders, and by elders, I mean cultural guardians, who share the wisdom of tens of thousands of years of experiential science and observation, I realized that the way that I had been approaching all of these problems was part of the issue. And that's basically what Project Tipping Point is here to do. It's here to connect people around a shared reality, a shared reality of right relationship, and a shared reality of not continuing to approach the problem from the same purview that has created it. Because if we do that, and we're actually positioning ourselves to be good ancestors for the future generations, as well as good descendants who've inherited a world from our ancestors, then we need to position ourselves to be good ancestors. And that's really what Project Tipping Point is about. Another thing that we do within there, and part of the reason why I wanted to have this call, is the climate is a lot more interconnected than we're giving it importance for. So grief is included in the climate movement. Intuition and our decision-making process is included in the climate movement. The language that we use is included in the climate movement. How many of you here are fighting climate change? How many of you here are listening to Earth rather than fighting? There's a really big difference, right, in that language. Why are we trying to fight climate change? The climate is just Earth. Why are we trying to fight our own mother? Why don't we listen to what she's saying us? Maybe we should learn something, maybe we should listen. So the war language of Earth, of English, which has been the obligatory language of business, is also a very big issue. Target market, chief executive officer, bullet points, take the flak, lay low, make a killing. All of these things exist within this English language of business, right? So even if we wonder why we're in an ecological crisis, maybe we should look at the language that we use. So language is involved in climate. Biomimicry, post-growth, degrowth, regeneration. All of these things are involved in climate, and they're all informed by our approaches. The sentiment informs the approach. So without shifting the worldview and the mindset, we can't possibly shift our approaches. And if we don't shift our approaches, then we're just going to keep recreating the same things over and over and over again. And that's basically the crux of the next stage of the climate movement is rooted in mindset and worldview. Because we have the technology, we have the creativity and the innovation, but what we don't have is the relationship with Earth. We don't have the cultural guardians leading biodiversity movements, even though they're the ones who've been living in the places where we're trying to invest in biodiversity for 10,000 years. We're still operating from a dominant paradigm. And until we shift that worldview, a lot of the work and the positive impact that we have with climate isn't going to be able to be delivered to the degree that it could be if we could shift that worldview and mindset, not in our intellectual concept of it, but our actual way of living. So it looks like there's two hands. I mean, I think we're going to save some time at the end for the Q&A. So if you could hold those questions, I think that would be great. So when do we want to start the breakout group? I can't see the time on my screen.
Yeah, so we are at 25 minutes into our session. So is it a good time to open it for the breakout rooms?
Yeah, so I'm gonna explain this question though, and then I'll hand it over to you. So
okay.
Right now, I'll give an example here. So one of the questions that people ask me a lot is, well, how am I going to tackle food waste? I'm like, first of all, don't tackle anything. Second of all, food waste. The best way to tackle food waste is to grow your own food. Because if you put the effort into growing a tomato, and it's going to take you multiple months to grow that, and you're going to see the love and effort and water and care that you've had to put into even eat that tomato, then you're going to stop wasting food. In the same way that robotic bees are not going to solve our pollinator problem, because the issue is the pesticides and the way that we're actually working with the land, the robotic bee would be an example of a techno-solutionist solution, right? I'm gonna apply these bees rather than adjust the way that I spray pesticides, treat the soil, and I'm trying to farm something that doesn't grow in this area. So in this same vein, that a robotic bee is not the answer to the problem, in what way are we responding to the crisis that is actually a part of the crisis itself? This is the breakout room question. What are some examples of this that you see? What are some examples of this that you see in climate? And what would it look like to find solutions rooted in an interconnected, holistic nature? So that's the breakout room question. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope we didn't lose anyone in cyberspace. Good to see some familiar faces here too. So this call is going to run a couple minutes over. If you can stay, awesome. If you can't stay, I understand. So what we want to do now is just have two of the groups just either self-assign yourself, or your group can maybe you all assign yourself someone who can just share like a 2-minute brief of what your group gathered from this breakout group question and share it with us here. So it's just open right now for two people to share from two different groups. Yeah, go ahead, Justine.
Hi, hello everybody. We were just having quite a really interesting heated debate about carbon and net zero, and how there is this consensus that we need to lower our carbon emissions and we need to capture some of the excess carbon that's been released in the atmosphere, and the different ways we are going to be able to do that. But that until we are questioning why we need so much energy, why we need to consume so much and put the curve into that, we're just going to be heading straight into the wall. So the question isn't, the focus isn't on how to clean up the energy, but like how much energy we need. Why do we need so much? And why has it become like a sort of accepted truth that our economy should keep growing and growing and growing on a planet that just cannot sustain it and shouldn't sustain it? So the question isn't about the carbon and the energy. The question is, why so much energy? So that's sort of where we were starting to conclude the conversation around that.
Yeah, awesome. That's a great one. Yeah, it came up in our group too, around how carbon credits and decarbonization and geoengineering and all of these things are actually just the same exact approach, where we can just think that we can pay to fix something. And why are we tunnel visioned in on one thing like carbon when we're not addressing any of the other interconnected things or the root cause of why that's even an issue in the first place? So that's a really good example. Thank you for sharing. One other person who wants to share?
Could I go ahead? Oh, it's
Yep.
or not from the same group. Sorry. It's the same group. Sorry.
It's a courageous group. We need someone else from a different group to step up. Thank you for chiming in, though. If no one comes in 20 seconds, I'm gonna have to pick someone.
Okay. One of the things we talked about with the food waste was how our food systems are basically 5 huge nodes. 5 major companies produce most of the food in all of the world. And so if one of those goes out, it affects a huge portion of the population of the planet. Whereas if we were to go back down to being more local and more interconnected food systems that are less driven by big business, that would help reduce food waste, because food wouldn't be traveling as far, as well as like the amount of carbon we would be using on, getting that food in the first place. So it would have a lot of benefits for food waste, I think, too.
So relocalizing food movements and
systems in general, yeah.
Did anyone know that why? Does anyone know why the an apple that's grown in northern India, flown to South Africa to be washed and shipped to the United States, can be cheaper than an apple grown in Washington? Does anyone know why that is?
I guess the labor.
Labor is one of the thoughts, but it's actually because it's subsidized through fossil fuel subsidies. So the more that something actually gets shipped, the cheaper that it can be, because it's subsidized by the uses of fossil fuel. That's part of the deep reason why. There was a global trade agreement. Has anyone heard of the group Local Futures? Be a really good group for you all to look into. Part of the content in Tipping Point too is there's just enough resources for you to probably read and discover things for a year. So part of what we wanted to do is also trim the fat, to cut through all of the noise, all of the misinformation, all of the stuff that continues to distract us from what we really need to focus on. There's a lot of resources in there too. Thank you, Ariel, for sharing that. Does anyone else want to share before we go into the Q&A? Okay. Well, I'm just going to leave it open for questions now, either about Project Tipping Point or any of the things that we're talking about. So I'm just going to open it up if anyone has questions. And if not, I can easily talk for 12 more minutes.
I have a question. related to what
Yes.
we're just were talking about, which is the if oil is subsidizing these things, how do we change that?
By growing your own food.
Fair enough. What
In the
about people that
in
can't,
this
like they don't
example.
have land, they live in the city?
Well,
Cities.
there's
Yeah,
definitely
go ahead.
examples of cities creating urban gardens now. And I mean, Austin has the urban food forest, which they're fighting right now, the expansion of the freeway 35. But it's it's basically a free garden where people can get local fruits and vegetables from. That's supported by volunteers. So I feel like more cities are doing something like that, even if you don't have the space to do it yourself. There's ways to access local food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, part of the issue, and this was mentioned in our group, is if one piece of this chain gets pulled out, we have zero resilience right now. One of the examples that we were talking about in the group, because both of us, Jenny and I, have both lived in Austin for a little bit, and when I was there was one time where I turned on the tap and no water came out. That's an experience that changes you. All of a sudden you realize that everything that you're doing doesn't actually matter because you don't have water.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I've had eight instances in 6 years of not having access to tap water.
Yeah. So in that same way, as COVID showed us as a teacher, really what it was showing us was our lack of resilience, our lack of community, right?
Yeah.
It pulled something out, and all of a sudden we couldn't get the basic things that we needed to get. Stores were empty, shelves were empty. There was also a byproduct of people coming together in community as a result of the need for resilience. But one of the things that it showed is that the way that we're structuring and centralizing our society without our agency or self-autonomy or sovereignty is eliminating our ability to actually survive and thrive if situations like this happen. And with the ecological crisis ramping up because we're trying to fight instead of listen, things are going to continually change. And we don't have resilience if we're operating as individuals. Yeah, Pete?
Yeah, I have a friend, Michael Reynolds, who's in Christchurch in New Zealand. And I mean, one of his projects has been there, a community garden. There are apparently 8 community gardens now in Christchurch, and one of the projects has been to reclaim the commons, which is to say to get the municipality to allow people to grow plants, grow food on the parks and in the public spaces. So they're now reclaiming, because part of the loss of the commons is that those parks were taken over by the municipalities. So people see it as the park, they see the park warden, they get a ticket if their dog poops or something. And so it's like it already belongs to the state. And what they've been doing is actually, with the municipalities, bringing those parks back in as part of the commons. And so then there are people coming in, and then they're growing food, and then they built up a beautiful collaboration with the organic food market. So they were able to get Sunday boxes at the end of the market, and then bring those into the park, and then have open kind of places where people could feed themselves. And so there was also like a whole process of dignity. Because, like, as we know, I mean, Britain now has more food banks than hospitals. Um, there are many places where there is just so little resilience. And what they were doing was building this up by reclaiming the commons in a very beautiful way, and also restoring dignity in a very beautiful way for those people who were challenged finding food. Absolutely amazing work that Michael has been doing. So I really shout out to his project.
Thank you, Pete. It's a great example. Rachel?
Thanks. Yeah, I have two questions. One is, I'm very much in accordance with what you're saying, what Project Tipping seems to be. I just, and I really like that idea from one of the groups that talked about if carbon accounting, why are we accounting? Why are we looking at, why are we needing this energy? And I get that. I think two things. There's a cohort coming up with Project Tipping Point. What's the main focus? Is it looking at the different sources of materials to read and understand how best to listen and kind of more acclimatized to the idea of having this interconnectivity and collaboration? And yet at the same time, in a collaborative world, is it not potentially a defeatist to kind of say that people who are doing carbon accounting, because I think you need to start somewhere, right? Otherwise you get overwhelmed. The steps need to be taken, at least to feel like we're measuring something to then see how we can move things along whilst we understand that we need to listen. So I think that there might be how do you sort that out in the cohort? How is it approached?
Yeah, great question. So when I'm sharing that the current way that we're doing things is not the solution, I'm not saying that it's bad. But what I am saying is that it's not going to get us where we need to go. So I'm not attempting to demonize anyone who works in climate in the current mechanics of how it functions, but it's important to look at the mechanics of how it functions and see that it is operating in a capacity that, despite our best efforts, is going to continue to proliferate the same sort of issues. So with that being said, one of the things that Tipping Point does, it focuses, and this is what there's two different journeys. The Tipping Point one is mostly for people who want to connect within community to like chew on these very difficult questions and actually don't have answers for these questions. Things where they're like, wow, yeah, I've been thinking about that, but I haven't had anyone to talk with that about. And then you're surrounded by 10 or 15 people who are also chewing on that same problem. So Tipping Point starts out with, there's a basis level of information around decolonization and infinite growthism and all of this other sort of stuff. That's the baseline understanding for where we have to then move from for Tipping Point. We go into the social science of tipping points and how that actually functions. Then we go into an internal journey that is rooted around things like grief, things around the wetiko, which is the psychic virus that the indigenous people noticed of the Europeans when they came to colonize the United States. We go into dominant worldview, we go into language, and then we pop out into pragmatic examples guided by this one specific example in Denmark called Reduction Roadmap, which has been a grassroots movement that has mobilized the entire construction industry in Denmark through a few employees starting the movement to have them tethered to the Paris agreements. So how do we actually start to work within these frameworks and structures that have been successful, utilizing the worldview and the understanding that we're now garnering and starting to embody on a deeper level of where things need to go? How do we work with each other globally, take this global brain, because people from Finland are interacting with people from Vietnam, are interacting with people from Colombia and Canada. So all these different examples and things that people are doing, they all come into this space, and then people can go and start to work with them bioregionally with the support of this global community. So that's basically what Project Tipping Point is about. And a lot of people, I mean, they're like, they come onto the calls and they're like, this is one of my favorite things that I do all week, is get to talk with all these really beautiful people who I wish just lived near me, you know, because a lot of people can't talk about this stuff with their friends, and they feel like they can't talk about it at work, or they get looked at as the person who's like too passionate about climate, or I don't know, any of this sort of stuff. But as far as addressing your question on another level, the focuses are fourfold in what we do. There's the meta. So we're in a meta crisis, right? Which has rippled out into a poly crisis. Meta crisis is the narrative of separation and how that's fully disassociated us, even in ways that we still don't even comprehend as we're on this call. So we look to repair that separation and begin to reconcile that separation with studies of kinship worldview from a lot of my different indigenous original peoples teachers from around the world. We then look at this existing system. How can we do less harm in the existing system? How can we utilize these existing things and still start to move in the direction of the bridge, which is the transitionary period that a lot of us are trying to step into with our work. How do we bring this existing system of do less harm into the transitionary bridge that pops us out into the paradigm where we're moving to, where we're still not operating from these same loops of thought, of dominance and separation and reductionism and all of these other things that we continue to do, compartmentalization, lack of connection. So that's basically Tipping Point focuses on those 4 things as well. I hope that answers your question. So yeah, as all of you can see, there's actually a few members of the community are here on the call with us. Sigrid, Pete, Ariel, and Jiz. There's a bunch of really amazing people. It's one of the coolest parts of my life is that I just get to interact with all of these epic people from around the world all the time. To come up with these actual ways of implementing solutions that are going to not only help our individual lives and our organizational lives and our systemic lives, but they're just going to make everything a lot more fun and a lot more beautiful. And we're going to start to have community, and we're going to start to reconnect with Earth and feel the joy that comes from like doing these things that we've always done as human beings. It's only been within the last couple hundred years that we've shifted out of these things that really make us human. You know, human comes from humus, which means soil. So as you can see here on the slide, our next cohort starts July 23rd. And we're giving anyone who's a member of Work on Climate a 50% discount code to join. It comes with like thousands of resources, frameworks, podcasts, books, articles, graphs. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of all the different things that are in there. We're doing our best to continue to gather more and more community, to cultivate momentum, just because the more of us that actually align with this worldview and bring this into our work and our lives and talk with our friends about it and share it through our networks, the more and more that it starts to move. And education and awareness is the first layer of how this has to go. We can't really shift anything if the base layer of our education is still connected with the paradigm that we're attempting to shift out of. So we have to start at that level. There's also a huge media asset library created by Casper, where people can share any of these graphics and assets. And then there's journal prompts and content and live calls, and it's a good experience from what I've heard. A lot of people enjoy it. So outside of that, if anyone has any other questions, you could email me, or you can go on the Rebiz website and reach out to me there, or you can just join the cohort and invest in your own evolution, and invest in your connection with community of people who are all actively on this early adopter innovator level, where they're seeing that the way that we're continuing to approach these things, as much as our heart and minds are desiring positive impact, we have to shift something. And the people who are seeing that are on the early part of that curve. And we're looking to gather them together and do some really cool work together. So like that, without forgetting anyone or anything, I'm gonna hand it back to you, Priyanka, and thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, can you, okay, you stop sharing. So before we conclude, I just wanted to request everyone, give us some feedback. I'll share the QR code. Let me do it. So please use this QR code to share your feedback about today's event. What do you think about it? What can we improve? And what kind of topics would you like to see in our upcoming session? So at the end of this insightful session, I wanted to thank Ryan, James, and Rebiz for your time. And thank you everyone in the audience who stayed back, and hope to see you in our next event. Goodbye.
Thank you.